Hi everyone, my name is Mary Ann, and after getting introduced to the MS community on YouTube by watching Kezcast and Irish Bear and Andrea and others that I'm just starting to watch, I wanted to join in and become a little part of that community. I was diagnosed in 2008, but I think with since out of my doctors looking back over my life, I'm 55 now, that I have pretty much had MS my whole adult life, but it just went by the wayside undetected in the midst of everything else going on. But it certainly explains an awful lot of what happened to me during my life, health-wise, emotionally wise, and even though probably back in the early 70s they couldn't have done much about it, it was actually a relief when I was finally diagnosed because it made so many things in my life make so much sense to me that had left me at times depressed and wondering if I was crazy. And of course, at the time that I was doing the most wondering about that, I lived in California, where everybody and their dog has a psychiatrist, so everything was chalked up to being crazy if they couldn't immediately find some physical cause for it. And as you all know, very often MS presents itself in relapse remitting form, and things happen and they go away. And I'd had a few serious medical issues in my life, and I took care of them. But there were a lot of things that happened that would come, and just maybe when I'd be on the verge of going to see a doctor about it, I'd change my mind because it went away and it didn't come back again. Um, as it turns out, I found out later when I was finally diagnosed, I have extremely high EBV titers, Epstein-Barr virus titers. I got every kind of viral infection and bacterial infection in the world as a kid and a teenager, and I would go through periods of bizarre things. Like in my 20s, I went through a period of about 5 years where I would come down with strep throat with absolutely no symptoms. It was only accidentally discovered. I never had a sore throat. I ran only a fever of 99, which I now know if I run a fever of 99, something's going on with me. Um, and no white spots on the throat, no other symptoms, no cold, nothing. And it would be strep throat, and it went on that way for a while. What probably was the real icing on the cake and the clue at the time was back in 1988 when my first son was born after a perfectly normal pregnancy, and I was in great health and eating well and doing, I thought I was in great health, doing everything I possibly could. At the very last minute, he almost died, and it was really, really a close call. But for the grace of God and an emergency C-section, he wouldn't be here. And unfortunately, the pathology lab put the placenta in formaldehyde, and they could never really tell what the infection was, even though the infection supposedly was impossible to have happened because my bag of waters was intact. And they told me the chances of what happened to him happening were 50 million to 1, and that I obviously had some kind of autoimmune problem. And, well, I left it at that and just went on with my life. But I could never figure out in my life why I was so tired all the time. My former husband, back when our kids were little and stuff, would laugh because every now and then I would just go to sleep for the weekend, literally for the whole weekend. And I was always tired. And in my 40s, although I had gone to college and became an attorney, I was at that time working for a lawyer who was a very good friend of mine who tried everything to help me out, to keep me in this job that I had been doing and was doing okay for a while. But I started to get such cognitive difficulties that he'd say, "Did you fax something to Mr. So-and-so?" And I'd be like, "Who's Mr. So-and-so?" Or I couldn't remember what I'd been working on the day before. So it got worse and worse, and no matter how much sleep I got, I used to just crave shutting the office door and curling up on the floor and going to sleep and never being able to understand it. I didn't understand why I bumped into walls and why I was clumsy. I had an experience just once, thank God, when I was volunteering at a local ER in the hospital, and for a 2-week period, I had what I now know is the MS hug around my chest, and I felt like my chest was in an absolute vice, and it kept getting worse and worse. And I used to go around the ER looking at the little oxygen things on the walls, wishing that I could just go up and just put on some oxygen and start breathing. But I thought, this is really weird. I could tell it wasn't cardiac, and just when I was about to go to a doctor to ask about that, that disappeared too. Later on, I had strange things like an inability to swallow, but I didn't quite know what to make of that. I had for years suffered from this strange phenomenon that I'd never brought up to a doctor because it just seemed so bizarre to me, and then I'd forget about it, where I'd be lying in bed and I'd move my head and I'd feel like an ice pick of electricity just shot up into the base of my skull. And all these things went on for a really long time, and they affected relationships. I was often always late. I finally, even with that good friend, he had to finally let me go because I kept making so many mistakes. He didn't think that I cared, and I did deeply, but I just didn't know what was wrong with me. I thought that it was depression, and certainly there was depression there, and but I had strange leg movements and numbness and things like that, but nothing that ever made me go rushing off to report it. And when I would report it, everybody would say, well, that's no big deal. Or with forgetting things, as I know so many of you have experienced, it's oh, we all go through that. We all forget things, it's just, that's just the way life is. And it was very, very different for me. When in 2005 I suffered a major concussion, and it caused some serious problems for a long time after that. And I had to stop working, and I didn't know if it was going to be permanent at that time or not. I kind of suspected it was, because it was always sort of an act of my getting through the day, of remembering what I was doing or working on or anything like that. And it's not 2005, 2006. And then a couple years later, I woke up one morning lying down, and the whole room was spinning. It was the worst vertigo I could imagine. It just felt like everything was spinning around me. And I got up, and my face was palsied, and my right side was drooping, and I couldn't talk or string my words together really well. I had watched Carrie's video when she went through one of her relapses at that time, and really understood what she had been going through, because I felt the same way. I felt like I was living in a fishbowl looking out at the world, and I went to walk across the room, and I just kept listing to the right and falling down. And my son took me to the doctor, and she said, I think you're having a stroke, and they sent me off to the hospital. And after they ran all the tests, they said, you didn't have a stroke. And I spent 3 days with the attending physician going through my whole medical history. She said that after the MRIs and all the other stuff, she said, I believe you have multiple sclerosis. And I was shocked, because I knew virtually nothing about multiple sclerosis, and there I was, 52 years old. But luckily the hospital had wireless, and I had my laptop, and I was a big researcher, so I spent the time learning everything I possibly could about MS, and going, aha. And the hospitalist doctor said that before I was discharged, I had to consult with a neurologist after I had started to recover from some of these symptoms. Although they thought it was multiple sclerosis, they didn't confirm it, so they didn't treat me with anything. They just watched me basically for a few days, and hoped that things would get better. The computer in the meeting space was right outside my room, and the neurologist came about